The winding road had done its best to shed me. It narrowed from asphalt to gravel, then to a pair of rutted tracks barely wider than my sedan, hemmed in by a wall of pines that clawed at the sky. Each mile deepened the silence, swallowing the faint hum of my tires, replacing it with the rustle of unseen things in the undergrowth. This was it. The end of the line. The place my grandmother had retreated to decades ago, and from which she'd never truly emerged. Now I was here to cut the cord for good. The farmstead appeared suddenly, a skeletal silhouette against a bruised late-afternoon sky. It wasn't a farm in any productive sense anymore, just a collection of decaying structures clinging to a patch of land that looked like it had given up trying. The house itself was a two-story box of peeling paint and sagging eaves, its windows like vacant eyes staring out from under heavy brows of overgrown ivy. A collapsed barn leaned precariously, its timbers silvered by neglect, and a rusted-out pickup truck sat half-swallowed by weeds near a choked-up well. I killed the engine. The abrupt quiet was profound, a physical weight in the air. Stepping out, my boots crunched on loose stones, a jarring sound in the oppressive stillness. The air here was thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else. A faint, metallic tang that prickled the back of my throat. As an architect, my first impulse was always to assess, to categorize, to solve. I squinted, running a professional eye over the property. Foundation issues, certainly. Roof replacement, absolutely. The land itself, though, that was the real asset if I could just clear the blight of these structures. Get it surveyed, listed, sold. Quick, clean, done. My grandmother's death had been cryptic. That was the word the county sheriff had used, his voice carefully neutral over the phone, as if speaking about the weather. No foul play, he'd assured me, but no clear cause either, beyond natural circumstances for a woman her age. She'd simply been found, peaceful, in her armchair, a half-filled journal on the floor beside her. I hadn't seen her in 15 years, not since I left for college and never looked back. There was no grief, only a distant responsibility, a logistical hurdle to clear. Before I'd made the final turn onto the farm road, I'd stopped at the general store, a ramshackle building that smelled of dust and stale coffee. The proprietor, a man whose face was a roadmap of sun-baked wrinkles, had eyed my city plates with a slow, appraising look. When I mentioned the old Harper farmstead, he'd paused, wiping down the counter with a cloth that looked older than he was. "That land," he'd said, his voice a low rumble. "It's got a way about it. Always has. Your grandmother, she understood." He'd offered no further explanation, just a long, unsettling stare that lingered a moment too long. I'd just nodded, paid for my bottled water, and mentally filed it under local superstitions. People out here, isolated as they were, tended to invent stories to fill the quiet. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light piercing the grimy windows. My grandmother had lived here, alone, for decades. The thought held no sentimental weight, only a practical consideration of how much work it would take to clear it all out. I walked through the silent rooms, my footsteps echoing on the bare floorboards. The kitchen was a relic, an ancient cast-iron stove dominating the space. Upstairs, the bedrooms were equally barren, save for a few forgotten items. It was all so final. The air grew heavier with each passing moment, a suffocating quiet that pressed in from all sides. The few windows offered views of nothing but dense, unyielding forest. The trees so close they seemed to be trying to reclaim the house, their branches tapping faintly against the glass like restless fingers. It struck me then, the absolute isolation of this place. The way the valley swallowed the light, the way the mountains loomed, cutting off the horizon. It wasn't just remote, it was sealed off. This wasn't just isolation. It was confinement, like being stuck in a prison yard in thick fog, where every direction looked the same, and escape felt impossible. I shook my head, dismissing the thought. Architects didn't deal in feelings. We dealt in facts. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Of course, just one more inconvenience. I'd brought a flashlight, a multi-tool, and a satchel full of paperwork. I had a schedule to keep. This place was just a property, a transaction, a problem to be solved. And I was determined to solve it. It was a rhythmic, almost deliberate scratching, like something dragging itself across a floorboard. I froze, listening. The sound stopped. I waited, heart rate unchanged, my mind already cataloging possibilities. A loose shutter, a branch against the roof, an animal. This was an old house, after all. Old houses made noises. I would find the source, and I would fix it. I always did. The farmhouse interior was a mausoleum of forgotten moments, each object coated in a fine, silken layer of dust. I kicked at a loose floorboard, sending up a small cloud that caught the weak afternoon light. The air tasted of mildew and something else. Something metallic and cold, like old coins left out in the rain. Faded floral wallpaper peeled back from the plaster like sunburnt skin, revealing dark, wet-looking patches underneath. I moved through the rooms, pulling back the musty coverings. A floorboard creaked upstairs, distinct from my own movements. I paused, hand on a doorknob. The sound came again, a slow, drawn-out groan, as if someone heavy was shifting their weight. I told myself it was the house settling, the old timbers adjusting to the change in temperature or humidity. But the air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing in on me. I spun around. Nothing. Just the draped furniture, the peeling wallpaper, the dust motes dancing in the meager light. I forced myself to climb the narrow, winding staircase. Each step groaned a complaint. A small wooden desk sat by the window, covered in papers and an open journal. This must have been where she spent her final days. The thought sent a shiver through me. I picked up the journal, its leather cover cracked and brittle. My grandmother's neat, looping script filled the pages, but I wasn't ready to delve into her thoughts just yet. As dusk bled into night, the farmhouse transformed. The weak afternoon light that had once pierced the grimy windows now vanished, plunging the rooms into a gloom that felt impossibly deep. I told myself it was the wind, the old house groaning under its weight. I tried to focus, to outline my plans for the property, but the feeling of being observed was relentless. It wasn't just a sense of eyes on me. It was a subtle pressure, a weight in the air making my skin crawl. I closed my eyes, trying to clear my head, and for a terrifying, disorienting second, I wasn't in the dusty farmhouse. The fog was so dense I couldn't see my own hands, couldn't tell where the sky ended and the ground began. The silence was absolute, suffocating, a vacuum where sound should be. Then, just as suddenly, the image shattered, and I was back in the flickering candlelight, my heart thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I gasped, sucking in the stale air. What the hell was that? A hallucination? Fatigue? The isolation was already getting to me. The next morning, determined to shake off the lingering unease, I drove into the nearest settlement. Little more than a crossroads with a general store and a gas pump. The air was crisp, the sky a vast, indifferent blue, and the familiar rumble of my truck's engine was a comforting anchor to reality. Inside the store, the air was thick with the smell of dust, old coffee, and something sweet, like dried apples. An old man, his face a road map of deep wrinkles, sat behind the counter, polishing a chipped ceramic mug with a rag. His eyes, the color of weak tea, regarded me with an unnerving intensity as I picked up a few essentials. "You're the architect, ain't ya?" he rasped, his voice like gravel. "Seth, heard you're staying up at the old place." I nodded, feeling a familiar prickle of irritation at the instant notoriety. "That's right." He set the mug down with a clink. Good land, that. Rich. But some riches, they ain't meant for digging up. I raised an eyebrow. Just planning on clearing it out? Selling it off? He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. Sell it, you say? Folks tried that before. They always come back, or they don't come back at all. The land has its ways. It remembers. He paused, his gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. And what sleeps beneath the soil? Just old stories, I said, trying to sound dismissive, but my voice felt thin. The old man just smiled, a wide, unsettling grin that showed yellowed teeth. As I drove back up the winding dirt road towards the farmhouse, the landscape seemed to have shifted. The farmhouse, when it finally appeared through the pines, looked less like a temporary dwelling and more like a waiting maw. The feeling of being watched was no longer a subtle pressure. It felt like a tangible presence, breathing just behind me. The winding dirt road, which had felt merely long and neglected on my first approach, now seemed to stretch into an endless, desolate ribbon. Each turn brought the farmhouse closer, but the air around it felt denser, the shadows cast by the towering pines longer, more grasping. The old man's words from the general store, the ones about the land having its own ways, its own hunger, picked at the edges of my thoughts like burrs. I dismissed them, of course, superstition, old mountain tales. But the silence, once a comfort, had morphed into something vast and expectant, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath, waiting for me. The farmhouse stood, a gaunt sentinel against the bruised evening sky. Inside, the air was still and cool, thick with the scent of dust and aged wood. My original plan had been to make a quick sweep, pack up anything valuable and list the property. Pragmatic, efficient. That was my way. But the farm, it seemed, had other plans. I started with my grandmother's bedroom. It was the most personal space, the one that felt heaviest with her absence. The room was a jumble of her life. Antique dresses draped over a cheval mirror, a vanity table cluttered with tarnished silver brushes and dried sachets, a four-poster bed covered in a faded floral quilt. Dust motes danced in the sparse light filtering through the grime-streaked windows, tiny, ephemeral galaxies. I opened a massive oak wardrobe, its hinges groaning in protest, revealing rows of woolen coats and heavy dresses, all smelling faintly of mothballs and something else. A dry, earthy scent, like forgotten leaves. My hands moved methodically, pulling out old hat boxes, sifting through drawers filled with yellowed lace and brittle photographs of people I didn't recognize. There was no sentimentality in my movements, only the steady rhythm of a task to be completed. I was an architect, after all. I dealt with structures, with foundations, with the tangible. What was here was merely debris, the remnants of a life. As I reached the bottom drawer of an old, heavy chest, my fingers brushed against something hard, oddly shaped, tucked beneath a stack of linen handkerchiefs. It wasn't a jewelry box, nor a packet of letters. It was a book. Not a typical journal, though. The edges were worn smooth, almost polished, as if it had been handled constantly, reverently. There was a peculiar, almost organic clasp on its side, a hook of blackened metal that looked more forged than manufactured. My fingers fumbled with the clasp, a strange prickle of anticipation running up my arm. The leather groaned softly as I opened it. Inside, the pages were thick and creamy, filled not with neat script, but with an unsettling jumble of symbols. They were intricate, geometric, yet organic, like twisted roots or distorted constellations. Some reminded me of archaic runes, others of designs I'd seen in esoteric texts, though I couldn't place them. It wasn't a language I knew, nor any code I could decipher. My architect's mind, usually so adept at pattern recognition, found no purchase here. Then, buried amidst the glyphs, I found sections written in English, though they were fragmented, almost deliberately obscured. Not a narrative, but a series of cryptic entries spaced far apart, sometimes only a single phrase on a page. "The burden," one read, scrawled in a shaky hand. Another, beneath a swirling star-like symbol. "The price. Always the price." Further on, a page filled with a repeating pattern of triangles and circles beneath it. "Rituals of appeasement. To keep it quiet. The world will twist." My breath hitched. My pragmatic brain tried to dismiss it as senility, a lonely old woman's rambling. But the consistency, the sheer density of the strangeness was unsettling. This wasn't just a flight of fancy. This was deliberate. The words burden and appeasement resonated with the vague warnings of the old man from the general store, the ones I'd so easily dismissed. The walls around me, once merely dusty plaster, felt like they were pressing in, suffocating. The light from the window dimmed, though no cloud had passed. I gripped the journal tighter, its old leather feeling strangely alive in my hands. The sounds I'd heard in the night, the low, resonant hum, the grinding beneath the earth. They weren't just natural geological shifts, were they? And the reclusive locals, their averted gazes, their hushed warnings, they weren't just eccentric. They knew something. My grandmother knew something. The journal continued to offer its disturbing breadcrumbs. "The boundary must be maintained," one entry stated. "The feeding. It keeps it quiet." Feeding? My mind recoiled. What kind of madness was this? The word containment wasn't explicitly written, but the implication was clear. Something was being kept here, under this land, and my family for generations had been its reluctant custodians. Or worse, a tomb, and I was trapped inside it, holding the map to its most terrible secret. This was deliberate. The words burden and appeasement resonated with the vague way, with a cold dread that had nothing to do with senility. I closed the journal, the old leather cover slick beneath my fingers. The air in the study felt heavy, thick with unspoken things. I needed to clear my head. This was a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, old and neglected. Things creaked, things settled. The grandmother, a reclusive figure I barely knew, had lived a solitary life. Of course, she'd developed eccentricities. That was the logical explanation. Practical concerns. I walked to the kitchen, intending to make some coffee, to ground myself in routine. That's when the first tremor hit. It wasn't violent, not like an earthquake. The antique ceramic plates on the shelves rattled with a low, mournful chime. The floorboards beneath my feet vibrated, a resonant hum that traveled up my legs and settled in my teeth. I froze, listening. The sound faded as quickly as it came, leaving only the mundane tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. "Old pipes," I muttered aloud, the words sounding thin and unconvincing even to my own ears. "Water hammer. Or maybe the old well pump kicking on." The farm was ancient, its infrastructure a patchwork of decades. Anything could be groaning under the strain. I poured water into the kettle, my hands steadier than I felt. Later that afternoon, I decided to tackle the overgrown garden, another attempt to impose order on the chaos. I grabbed the rusty shears and a pair of thick gloves. The soil here was always rich, dark, and loamy, but today, something felt off. The weeds weren't just tenacious, they were aggressive. Tendrils of some vine, thick as my thumb, had wrapped themselves around the porch railing overnight. The leaves a sickly, almost iridescent green I couldn't identify. They seemed to pulse with a faint, unnatural vigor. I knelt, pulling at a clump of what looked like mutated dandelions. Their stems were unusually thick, almost woody, and the flowers, instead of a cheerful yellow, had a bruised purplish hue at their centers. They were growing at an alarming rate, pushing up through the cracked flagstones, distorting the neat rows I'd tried to establish just a week ago. This wasn't typical Appalachian flora. This was an anomaly. Must be the unusual rainfall. I told myself, yanking a particularly stubborn root. Or some kind of soil additive my grandmother used. Organic, probably. A little too organic. My rationalizations were becoming increasingly flimsy, even to me. As dusk approached, the air grew heavy, pregnant with an unnatural stillness. The chirping of crickets, usually a constant companion, was absent. Even the cicadas were mute. I was pruning back some dead branches near the old shed when I heard it. A frantic fluttering, a desperate scratching from within. I peered through a gap in the rotting planks. Inside, a flock of small birds, sparrows or finches, were beating themselves against the single grimy window, not trying to escape, but simply flying into the glass again and again, their tiny bodies thudding with sickening regularity. Their movements were jerky, uncoordinated, completely devoid of their usual grace. They weren't singing. They were making short, sharp, distressed cries. One lay twitching on the dusty floor, its wing bent at an impossible angle. My stomach clenched. This wasn't normal. Birds didn't just collectively lose their minds and batter themselves against a pane of glass. This wasn't a cat, or a predator, or a sudden storm. Internal. A profound disorientation. I backed away slowly, the shears heavy in my hand. The quiet, the abnormal growths, the ground shuddering. Now this. My pragmatism, my rock-solid belief in logic and order, was starting to crack. I turned towards the house, needing the false comfort of its walls. The air seemed to shimmer, blurring the edges of the familiar barn. For a single jarring moment, the landscape shifted. The rolling hills, the dense woods, the weathered farm buildings. They all dissolved. I was standing suddenly on rough, broken concrete. In the distance, I heard the faint, monotonous clang of metal on metal, a rhythmic, hopeless sound. A concrete block structure, impossibly grim and featureless, loomed partially out of the thick fog, its windows like vacant eyes. I felt the overwhelming, crushing weight of confinement, of endless gray days. This wasn't the farm. Then, just as abruptly, it was gone. The farmstead was back, solid and real, though the light had deepened to an ominous twilight. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against my eardrums. I stood there, rooted to the spot, a tremor running through my limbs that had nothing to do with old pipes. The vision, the sheer, undeniable wrongness of it, had shattered the last vestiges of my disbelief. This wasn't just an old house settling, or strange weather, or eccentric flora. This was something else entirely. Something was bleeding into reality, distorting it, and I was caught right in the middle. This was deliberate. The words burden and appeasement resonated with the vague way. I slammed the journal shut. My hands trembled slightly, but it wasn't from fear. Not yet. It was from a new, unwelcome surge of adrenaline, fueled by a determination I hadn't known I possessed. Dismissal was no longer an option. The architect in me, the part that craved structure and understanding, demanded answers. If this land held some monstrous secret, some ancient weight my grandmother had been wrestling with, then I needed to see it, touch it, quantify it. I flipped through the journal again, past the increasingly frantic entries, the faded sketches of strange, non-Euclidean angles, and the rambling thoughts about cycles and hunger. Then, a smaller, almost hidden section caught my eye. It wasn't a map, not in the traditional sense. It was a series of quick, almost frantic charcoal lines, depicting a gnarled, ancient oak, the one at the edge of the property line, I realized. And beyond it, a broken line that seemed to indicate a wall. Underneath, a single stark phrase: "The Watcher's Gate, where the earth remembers." The morning sun was already struggling to burn through the persistent mist that clung to the higher elevations of the property. By the time I'd pulled on my boots and a heavy jacket, the fog had thickened considerably, swallowing the distant peaks and muting the already hushed sounds of the woods. I headed towards the old oak, its twisted branches like skeletal fingers against the gray. The ground grew softer, the soil damp and clinging to my boots. The air itself seemed to grow heavy, carrying a faint, earthy scent mixed with something metallic, like old pennies left out in the rain. The fog pressed in, reducing visibility to a mere few yards, transforming familiar trees into looming, indistinct shapes. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves I couldn't quite place, made the hairs on my neck prickle. The oak stood sentinel just as depicted. Beyond it, barely visible through the swirling white, was a low, crumbling stone wall, almost entirely consumed by ivy and moss. It wasn't part of any fence line I'd seen on the property maps. This wall was ancient, its stones rough-hewn and dark, set without mortar, simply stacked with a grim, enduring purpose. The fog here was different. It didn't drift. It hung, thick and opaque, like a dirty shroud. The air was unnaturally still, the usual forest sounds, the distant chirping of birds, the rustle of leaves, completely absent. The ground underfoot was oddly flat, cleared of undergrowth, covered instead with a thin, grayish dust that seemed to absorb all light and sound. The stone wall, now fully encompassing me, was higher here, crumbling at the top, but still formidable. A place of containment, of forgotten suffering. Then I saw them. They rose from the flat, gray earth in the center of the enclosure, barely discernible through the swirling mist. Not a circle, not precisely. They weren't shaped by human hands, not in any way I understood. These weren't quarried blocks, or even naturally eroded boulders. They were jagged, angular, with planes and facets that seemed to defy geometry, shifting subtly in the poor light. Some leaned at impossible angles. Others seemed fused together, forming grotesque, monolithic forms that loomed larger as I drew closer. The rock itself was unlike anything I'd ever seen. A faint, almost imperceptible vibration seemed to emanate from them, a low thrum that I felt more in my teeth than heard with my ears. This was it. The focal point. The weight of the place was immense, a physical pressure against my chest, making it hard to draw a full breath. The journal entries, the strange geological shifts, the unsettling sounds, they all coalesced around these unnatural formations. The burden, the appeasement, it all pointed to this. I walked closer, my boots crunching on the strange dust. The air grew heavier, the metallic tang stronger, almost coppery. One of the stones, taller than the rest, had a peculiar indentation near its base, a shallow, bowl-like depression. It was slick with moisture, but the liquid wasn't water. My pragmatic mind, the one that had scoffed at local superstitions and dismissed my grandmother's fears, was crumbling like the old wall around me. This wasn't just ancient. It felt wrong. Non-human. I was standing at the threshold of something immense, something terrible. And it had been waiting for someone to stumble into its lonely, fog-choked yard. Waiting for me. The fog had not merely thickened, it had congealed, become a living, breathing thing that pressed in from every direction. It was no longer just a mist clinging to the peaks. It was a hungry shroud, consuming the familiar landscape around me, leaving only a few feet of visibility. I stepped out onto the porch, the wet wood groaning beneath my boots, and the world immediately felt wrong. The barn, usually a comforting, if dilapidated landmark, was a monstrous silhouette, its familiar gables and roofline flattened and elongated by the opaque atmosphere. I walked down the steps, my hand gripping the wooden railing slick with moisture. It was uniformly soft, yielding, like trampled mud. My boots sank a little with each step, and the squelching sound was unnervingly loud in the profound silence. There were no bird calls, no rustling leaves, just the drip of moisture from the eaves and the unsettling squelch of my own progress. As I moved towards what I knew was the main path to the barn, the layout of the farm began to twist. The fence line, which should have been a straight run from the house to the old pasture, seemed to curve inward, creating a claustrophobic corridor. The weathered wooden posts, usually leaning at various angles, stood unnaturally straight, stark and uniform in the swirling gray. They looked like sentinels, their tops disappearing into the low-hanging vapor, giving the impression of impossible height. My architect's eye, trained to see lines and structures, rebelled against the distortion. Then I heard it. A faint, distant clang. Metallic, hollow, like a gate slamming shut in the distance. I stopped, straining my ears, but the sound didn't repeat. It hung in the air, an echo in the fog, before being swallowed by the pervasive quiet. My mind, ever the pragmatist, tried to rationalize it. A loose piece of tin on the barn, a branch falling and hitting something. But the sound had been too distinct, too precise. It had been the sound of iron on iron. I continued forward, the metallic tang growing stronger, making my nostrils prickle. The path I was on, which I'd walked countless times since arriving, felt unfamiliar. I was no longer on my farm. This wasn't the farm. The thought hit me with the force of a physical blow. The barn, now fully visible as I approached, wasn't a barn at all. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again, willing the image away. This was impossible. I was Seth, an architect, standing on my grandmother's farm. This was a hallucination, a trick of the mind, a product of exhaustion or stress. But the chain-link fence remained, the forbidding structure loomed, and the air still carried that sickening metallic odor, now layered with something acrid, like old despair. Panic clawed at my throat. I turned, intending to retrace my steps, to run back to the house, to the relative sanity of its walls. But the house was gone. The path behind me had dissolved into the same featureless gray expanse. The fence posts stretching into the infinite, identical and unrelenting. I was trapped in this nightmare vision. The farm swallowed whole by something profoundly wrong. A low, guttural murmur rippled through the fog, seemingly coming from all directions at once. It wasn't a voice, not exactly, but a resonant hum that vibrated in my chest. A wordless sound laced with ancient sorrow and profound hunger. I started to run, blindly, desperately, in what I hoped was the direction of the house. My feet churned through the mud, each squelch a mockery of my efforts. The fences seemed to stretch, to multiply, forming a bewildering maze. The metallic tang in the air grew so potent it burned my nostrils, and the distant, mournful hum intensified, a physical pressure against my eardrums. Was I screaming? I didn't know. My throat felt raw, but no sound seemed to escape the suffocating blanket of fog. My mind, once so ordered and logical, was splintering. The farm was a labyrinth, a shifting, impossible construct of fear and delusion. This entity, whatever it was, wasn't just beneath the earth. It was in the air, in the fog, in the very fabric of my perception, twisting reality into a grotesque parody of itself. I stumbled forward, my boots squelching on unseen mud, the chill seeping through my clothes and into my bones. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, but I could feel the rough, damp stone against my fingertips as I blindly reached out. A wall. I was trapped, utterly disoriented. My lungs burned, my eyes strained, trying to pierce the opaque curtain. Was I outside? Inside? There was only the wall, the fog, and the terrible, gnawing certainty that I was utterly alone, yet profoundly watched. It echoed, not from a direction, but from everywhere at once. A sound that bypassed my ears and clawed directly at my sanity. I choked, a gasp tearing at my throat, and shoved myself against the cold stone, wishing it would simply swallow me whole. I woke with a violent jolt, my body rigid, my breath ragged. The old armchair groaned beneath me, and the scattered journals on the floor confirmed my reality. My skin felt clammy. I must have drifted off, my mind exhausted from days of deciphering the looping, faded script of my grandmother's journals. The dream, or vision, felt too real, too visceral to simply dismiss as a nightmare. My hands trembled as I reached for the journal I'd been reading, its brittle pages smelling of dust and forgotten fears. I had been close. I knew it. The pieces had been assembling themselves in my mind, a horrifying mosaic. My grandmother's careful words, once cryptic ramblings, now laid bare a truth so monstrous I felt my stomach clench. She wrote of the burden, a word that appeared with increasing frequency in the later entries, her tone shifting from academic curiosity to weary resignation, but of desperate, agonizing necessity. Our forebears, they did not invite it, Seth. They stumbled upon it. A thing of immense age, slumbering, breathing in the deep places. They sought to understand, to harness perhaps, but found only hunger. A hunger for what we are, for what we feel. It feeds on the tremors of the soul, the despair of the spirit, the fear that curdles the blood. My eyes darted to the next paragraph, my breath catching in my throat. This was it, the core. They could not destroy it. No weapon, no ritual, no prayer could extinguish its terrible light. They could only contain. A fragile, terrible containment, woven not of iron or stone, but of belief, of constant vigilance, of a particular resonance found only in our bloodline. They became its wardens, its unwitting jailers, generation after generation, bound to this land, to this thing. The farm, the very earth beneath our feet, became a living lock, and we, the keys. The words blurred for a moment, my vision swimming. The entity. It wasn't some local ghost or a figment of Appalachian superstition. It was ancient, a fundamental force of entropy and despair, somehow tethered to my family. My grandmother's earlier, more detached entries had described its effects, the way it warped perception, twisted the environment, slowly, inexorably. They were the entity's breath, its stirring, its slow, agonizing awakening. The resonance, another entry elaborated. Her handwriting almost illegible now. It is strongest in those who feel deeply, who question, who seek answers. Those who come to this place, drawn by curiosity or by the pull of blood, they awaken it. They are the conduits, the thin places where its influence can seep out. And now, Seth, you are here. The line is thin. I wasn't just an heir to a dilapidated farm, I was an heir to a curse. My arrival, my attempts to understand, to dismiss the superstitions, had not been an accident. I hadn't simply inherited a property. I had inherited a responsibility, a generations-long burden, now resting squarely on my shoulders. I was the current warden, the latest in a long line of unwilling caretakers. The full, horrifying truth crashed over me like a tidal wave. My bloodline wasn't just tied to the farm. It was inextricably tied to the entity's awakening. I was the catalyst. Every strange occurrence, every unsettling encounter, every creeping fear I'd felt, it wasn't just happening around me. It was happening because of me. I wasn't just in danger. I was the danger. And the entity wasn't just beneath the land. It was intertwined with my very existence, feeding on my fear, growing stronger with every beat of my terrified heart. The thought was a physical blow, leaving me breathless and utterly terrifyingly alone. The thought, cold and sharp, carved itself into my mind, cutting through the last vestiges of my pragmatic disbelief. This wasn't just a property line anymore, or a dilapidated farmhouse with a dark history. It was a cage, and I, Seth, was its newest occupant. My arrival hadn't merely awakened some slumbering evil. It had uncorked it. given it the vessel it needed to truly stretch its ancient, malevolent limbs and bind me to its will. My first instinct, naturally, was to leave. Pack the truck, drive away, never look back. The key turned in the ignition with a hopeful click, but the engine only coughed, a dry, rattling sound that died almost immediately. I tried again. Nothing. Not even a sputter. I checked the fuel gauge. Full. The battery seemed fine. I popped the hood, stared at the immaculate engine as if sheer will could coax life back into it. It was no use. The truck was utterly inert, a heavy, silent monument to my failed escape. It was as if the vehicle itself had simply forgotten how to work, a sudden, inexplicable death. I tried the old ATV, then the tractor, both sitting forlornly in the overgrown barn. Each one met the same fate. Dead. Completely inert. No amount of tinkering, no amount of cursing, no amount of frustrated slamming of the hood could coax a single spark from their engines. The entity wasn't just an unseen presence. It was a puppeteer, pulling the strings of reality, including the very machines designed to carry me away. I grabbed my pack, stuffed some water bottles and a few energy bars in, and started walking. The long, winding dirt road that supposedly led to the main highway. It couldn't be more than 5 miles. I'd walked it before, a few days ago, when I'd needed to pick up supplies from the nearest general store, a small, dusty place 10 miles down the highway. My legs were strong, my resolve still burning. I could outwalk whatever subtle sabotage this land was inflicting. The light, already dim under the perpetually overcast sky, faded further, until I was walking in a perpetual twilight, even though it was barely mid-morning. The silence was profound, broken only by my own heavy footsteps and the frantic thumping of my heart. No birds, no insects, nothing. The farmhouse, with its leaning porch and broken windows, was closer than it should have been. Much closer. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. Had I turned around without realizing? Had I been walking in circles? No, I was sure I hadn't. I kept walking, faster now, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. Another hour passed. No signal. Of course. It hadn't had a signal for days, not since the strange seismic rumblings had started. My last link to any objective reality, severed. I pushed on, a desperate, frantic energy driving me forward. The road, or what I thought was the road, began to change. The dense canopy of trees receded, dissolved, replaced by a low, swirling mist that clung to the ground, obscuring my feet. The mist thickened rapidly, becoming a wall of gray. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. The ground was flat, featureless, stretching out in every direction. Where were the trees? Where was the road? This wasn't the farm anymore. This was a vast open expanse, enclosed by nothing but the impenetrable fog. A faint rhythmic clanging sound echoed in the distance, muffled by the mist, then faded. I spun around, trying to pinpoint its origin, but there was nothing. This wasn't a road. It wasn't woods. The words formed unbidden in my mind, stark and terrifying. A yard, vast and empty, designed for containment, not passage. I was trapped within its unseen walls, utterly disoriented, utterly alone. The fog wasn't natural. It was a barrier, a living, breathing manifestation of the entity's reach. It had taken the familiar landscape of my inheritance and warped it into a place of absolute confinement. Is anyone there? My words felt thin, pathetic, absorbed by the vast, empty space. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs threatened to give out, until I stumbled and fell, scraping my hands on the rough concrete. Lying there, gasping for air, the metallic taste strong in my mouth, a horrifying realization settled over me. This wasn't just physical entrapment. This was an invasion of my perception, a warping of reality itself. The entity wasn't just preventing me from leaving. It was changing the world around me, shaping it into its own personal cage. The farm, the woods, the road. They were gone, replaced by this featureless, suffocating expanse. I wasn't just cut off from the outside world. The outside world itself had been excised from my immediate reality. There was no outside anymore. Just this. Just me. The fog began to swirl faster, coalescing into vague, shifting shapes at the periphery of my vision. Not solid forms, not yet, but suggestions, implications of movement, of watchful presences. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again. The shapes were still there, indistinct, but closer now, pressing in. They weren't just in the fog. They were of the fog. I stumbled to my feet, my legs trembling. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation, anything to anchor me to sanity. A hallucination? A dream? But the rough concrete beneath my hands, the metallic tang in the air, the burning in my lungs, it was all too real. This was a living nightmare, and I was wide awake in its depths. The entity wasn't just beneath the land. It was the land, or at least it was making the land its own. My grandmother's journals had hinted at such power, at the veil thinning, at the truth of the land revealing itself. This was the truth. Total, inescapable isolation. I wasn't just trapped. I was utterly, profoundly alone, in a world that had ceased to be real. The rhythmic clanging sound returned, closer this time, clearer. It sounded like metal striking metal, a slow, deliberate cadence. Clang, clang, clang. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a sound designed to drive one mad. This was my new reality. This was my inheritance. My arrival had been its key. The journals scattered across the dusty floorboards became my desperate roadmap. No more detached observation, no more academic curiosity. Now it was survival. My fingers trembled as I flipped through the frantic, looping script of my grandmother, then her father, then generations before them. They hadn't just known about the thing beneath the farm. They'd managed it. Or tried to. There were pages filled with rambling despair, yes. That phrase clung to me. It implied a tearing, a thinness between here and wherever it was truly from. Beneath it, a single word, repeated in 3 different hands. Contain, contain. It wasn't about destroying it, I realized. Not yet. It was about pushing it back, about sealing whatever had been opened. My hands, suddenly clumsy, fumbled for a pencil and a scrap of paper. I copied the symbol, trying to match the exact angles, the slight asymmetry that felt deliberate. The journal mentioned iron-rich soil and the moonless night. I glanced out the window. The sky was a bruised purple, the sun already dipping behind the distant ridges. Tonight, then. It had to be tonight. I rubbed at it absently, my focus still on the journals, on the desperate hope they offered. I gathered the few tools I had, a small gardening trowel, a rusty bucket. The great-aunt's journal spoke of drawing the mark where the earth remembers. I took that to mean the oldest, most disturbed ground on the property, the place where the geological shifts had been most pronounced, the field behind the barn, where the land had begun to heave and crack like a broken plate. Stepping outside, the cold air bit at my exposed skin, a stark contrast to the oppressive warmth inside. Each breath I took felt heavy, damp, metallic. It tasted like old pennies. As I walked towards the field, the fog grew denser, swallowing the farmhouse behind me, reducing visibility to mere feet. The insistent itch on my arm intensified, burning now like 1,000 tiny needles pricking simultaneously. I glanced down. My skin, usually pale, had taken on a faint mottled gray hue in patches, almost like discoloration from a bruise, but without impact. It was unsettling, but my mind, now singularly focused on the task, pushed the physical anomaly aside. This was a side effect, I told myself, a symptom of proximity, not personal corruption. The hum grew louder, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated up from the earth itself. And then, through the swirling gray veil of the fog, the landscape shifted. The familiar field was gone. I was no longer on my farm. My breath hitched. My mind, straining against the unreality, tried to find a logical explanation. A trick of the light? A hallucination brought on by exhaustion and fear? The symbol. I had to draw the symbol. My hands, still clutching the trowel, felt alien, clumsy. My fingers dug into the hard earth, trying to carve the jagged star, the circle. But the lines I drew were crooked, wavering. The soil itself seemed to resist, clumping unnaturally, refusing to hold the shape. It was like carving into dried clay, brittle and unyielding. And then, a new sensation. My left arm, the one with the mottled skin, began to twist. Not violently, not with pain, but with a slow, internal rotation. My wrist, my elbow, they weren't bending in the ways they should. This wasn't just affecting the land, it was affecting me. The hum intensified, vibrating through the strange, stiffened bones of my arm. The prison walls around me seemed to lean in, the fog pressing down, suffocating. I tried to stand, but my legs felt heavy, rooted, like they were sinking into the hard, unyielding earth. My vision blurred, the world tilting. The symbol, half drawn in the dirt, seemed to pulse, to writhe, as if mocking my futile attempt. The entity wasn't just awakening, it was consuming. And I, Seth, was not just its jailer, but its newest, most intimate meal. My body was becoming a conduit, my mind a fractured echo. The fight was over before it began. My breath hitched, a ragged, useless gasp in a throat suddenly gone dry. The hum from the previous chapter ending wasn't just a sound. It was a frequency, vibrating through the very marrow of my bones, resonating with something deep and unsettling within me. My arm, the one I'd felt stiffening, now felt alien, heavy, like a limb carved from petrified wood. The whispers weren't just coalescing, they were speaking. A chorus of ancient voices that spoke not in words, but in a language of primal dread, of instinctual terror that clawed at the back of my skull. It was reaching for me, not with hands, but with an insidious tendril of pure, unfiltered fear. I stumbled back, my hand instinctively going to the heavy leather-bound journal clutched against my chest. It was inside me, a cold, calculating presence that sought to unravel my mind, to feed on the terror it so effortlessly generated. There was only one path left. The journals, my grandmother's desperate, cryptic scrawls had outlined it. A final, horrifying attempt at containment. Not destruction, she'd warned, for it was too vast, too ancient to be truly unmade. But a binding, a turning of the key. And the key, I now understood, was me. I pushed through the kitchen door, the wood groaning like a dying thing, and stepped out into what had once been the farmyard. But it wasn't the farmyard anymore. A dense gray mist had rolled in, swallowing the skeletal trees, blurring the edges of the distant mountains. It tasted like ash on my tongue. The barn, which had stood sentinel for generations, was gone. In its place, stretching endlessly into the impenetrable fog, stood a labyrinth of rusted steel bars. My own prison. My family's prison. The entity was here, all around me, manifesting its domain, trying to break me before I could even begin. Despair, it craved. Fear, it feasted on. But I wouldn't give it what it wanted. Not yet. I gripped the journal tighter, flipping to the dog-eared, stained pages that detailed the ritual. It was simple, deceptively so, yet I knew the true complexity lay in the will to perform it. I needed a vessel, a conduit, and a sacrifice. The vessel was a small, crudely fashioned iron box I'd found buried beneath the old oak, its surface etched with symbols that pulsed faintly with an internal light. The conduit was the land itself, and through it, me. The sacrifice. That was the hardest part. To sever the link, my grandmother had written, her hand trembling even on the page, to cut the thread that binds the jailer to the jailed. It wanted me to give up, to despair, to become another meal. I found the convergence point, marked on my grandmother's hand-drawn map. A withered, gnarled stump, its wood black and slick with what looked like dried tar. This was where the ley lines of the land and the tendrils of the entity met. My hands trembled, but I forced them steady. The ritual called for a binding agent, something from the land, something from me. I pulled out the tarnished silver locket I'd found in my grandmother's belongings, the one with a faded photograph of a young, smiling woman I barely recognized. My mother, my family, my legacy. This was the sacrifice. Not blood, not life, but the severance of my connection to all that had come before, all that tied me to the human world, to become utterly, completely alone, bound to this land, to this prison, to become the new caretaker, the new jailer, for as long as I could hold. I pressed the locket into a small depression on the box. As it settled, the box hummed, a deeper, more resonant note than the one that had been rattling my bones. The rusted bars of the prison yard warped, twisting like tortured metal, and for a terrifying moment, I saw vast, unimaginable forms pressing against them, their hunger and palpable, crushing force. The entity was fully awake now, and it was screaming its rage. It knew what I was trying to do. It knew I was trying to lock it back away. I closed my eyes, the din overwhelming, the psychological assault absolute. I imagined the thread, my thread, being cut. But the silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, suffocating, pregnant with an unseen presence. I opened my eyes. The prison yard was still there, the fog still thick, the rusted bars still stretched into infinity. But the overwhelming predatory hunger was gone, replaced by something else. The entity was still here, I realized, but it was contained. I felt it, though. I felt the profound, terrible isolation. I felt the ancient burden settle onto my shoulders, a legacy I could never escape. My family's horrifying truth was now my own. I was the lock. I was the jailer. And the world outside, the world I had just saved, would never know the cost. The blinding flash of cold, white light had seared my vision even through my closed eyelids, a white-hot knife behind my optic nerves. Then the silence. Not just an absence of sound, but a vast, crushing weight. It pressed in, thick and suffocating, muffling the memory of the entity's shrieks, eradicating the very concept of noise. It felt like the world had held its breath, and then simply forgotten to exhale. A deep, impenetrable black that made the previous night seem like high noon. My ears rang with a high-pitched whine, like a distant, dying star. I lay there, splayed on what I knew was still the cellar floor, but the floor felt different. I pushed myself up, my limbs heavy, sluggish, as if moving through syrup. My hands brushed against something solid, unyielding, a smooth, cool surface. Not the grimy stone of the cellar walls, nor the splintered wood of the crates. My fingers explored, tracing a sharp, clean corner. This wasn't the farm. It couldn't be. I breathed, and the air was sterile, still with a faint, almost imperceptible scent of disinfectant and damp concrete. My eyes, still struggling to adjust, slowly began to perceive faint, ethereal shapes. Not the familiar clutter of the cellar, but stark, geometric forms. Walls, high and featureless. A ceiling, equally bare. Then a shift. A subtle, almost imperceptible lightning. Not the sun, not a lamp, but a diffuse, pervasive grayness that seeped in from somewhere above, or perhaps from everywhere at once. And then I saw it. Or rather, I felt it before my eyes truly registered the visual. The fog. It rolled in, thick and silent, a living shroud that swallowed the edges of my vision, blurring the stark lines into soft, cottony contours. The revelation hit me like a physical blow, not with the shock of discovery, but with the dull, aching certainty of something long known, long accepted. My memory, fragmented and hazy, began to piece together fragments of an aftermath I hadn't truly processed until now. The binding, the iron box, the flash. And then, nothing. The fog swirled around my knees, then my waist, then seemed to climb, obscuring the upper reaches of the high walls that ringed this desolate enclosure. I could make out the faint skeletal silhouettes of what must have been guard towers, their tops lost in the swirling vapor. The ground beneath my worn boots was cracked asphalt, patched with weeds that somehow found purchase in the sterile environment. A chain-link fence, rusted at the bottom, ran along one side, disappearing into the whiteout. I was here. I had been here for... how long? Days? Weeks? The concept of time felt as fluid and meaningless as the fog itself. The entity, I realized with a jolt that barely registered as fear anymore, was gone. Or rather, it was contained. The binding had worked. The flash had been its compression, its forced retreat into the iron box, which now, I knew without seeing it, rested somewhere deep beneath the earth, sealed away. The entity hadn't just been contained, it had left its mark. An indelible psychic scar that stretched across the land, and deeper still, into the very core of my being. The farmstead I remembered now was a wasteland. Not a ruin, but a place utterly devoid of life. Of anything. The earth itself had been scoured clean, the trees reduced to brittle husks, the very air thin and lifeless. It was a wound in the world, a sterile scar that would never heal, a testament to what had almost been unleashed. And I was its sentinel, its keeper, or perhaps its prisoner. No birdsong, no wind whistling through unseen trees. My hand went to my chest, over my heart. It beat a steady, rhythmic thrum, but it felt borrowed. My skin felt too thin, my bones too brittle. The pragmatic architect was still there, but now he was overlaid with something else, something ancient and weary. The entity's influence, even contained, had seeped into me, changing the very fabric of my perception. I was one of them, perhaps even more so. A guard, perhaps. Or another inmate. It didn't matter. My purpose, my burden was internal. The world had been saved, yes, but the cost was everything. My life, my sanity, my future,